Hi, everyone. My name is Sana Sareshwala, and I'm so excited to talk to you today about how to use customer data to influence your team, engineers, and manager, and why it's important to use customer data as your North Star in not only your product, but also how to build trust at work. First off, I want to thank you all for joining my talk today, and I'd like to thank the Product School for giving me an opportunity to relay my experiences to you all. I am a product manager at Microsoft on the Office 365 team, and previously, I was at Amazon as a PM for a few teams, primarily Alexa Shopping, third party marketplace, and Amazon Fresh and Prime Now operations. I think this talk will be helpful for all PMs, but primarily those without a technical background or new PMs who would like to hone in their data skills. I am not speaking on behalf of either Microsoft or Amazon, but rather sharing my own experiences working at these two companies. And the themes and messages I bring forward are that of my own opinions. Super excited to let's get started. I come from a background in economics and political science. I do not have a CS degree. I didn't study computer science in undergrad and thought I was going to go into law and major in economics and political science. I interned at Amazon as a financial analyst and realized my passion for program management and technology. After my 6-month internship, I came back as a full-time business analyst. I then received a master's in data science from Columbia University, where I specialized in machine learning and business development. While I enjoyed producing metrics for my peers, my love for data didn't blossom until I became a PM and started to use data to build products and influence my partner teams. As a PM, I view the products that I drive like a living, breathing child, dynamic and evolving as my customers' demands change. There's no straight path to becoming a PM. I've seen engineers become product managers. I've had friends and colleagues take the MBA route to product management, and I've seen data and business analysts like myself become PMs. The great thing about product management is that you can leverage your existing skills, whether technical or non-technical, to become a rockstar PM. All right, let's go ahead and get started with the overview product lifecycle using data. In this talk, I'll go over how, and more importantly, why you should integrate customer feedback at every point of the product lifecycle. Data will help you stay aligned with the product mission, but get buy-in from partner teams, build trust with your engineers and managers, and ultimately scale up to larger impactful projects. We'll talk about how to assess the customer problem, define success metrics, create the product roadmap, and get technical approval, which is very important to leverage at any customer data in getting prioritization, implementation, feedback and iteration, and then ultimately documenting and publicizing. We will also touch upon what it means to onboard as a new PM and how to tackle imposter syndrome and practice empathy using data. All right, who is your audience? When I use the word customer, this is a dynamic term used to describe whoever your audience is. My customer has changed depending on the team I was on. When I was on Amazon Fresh, my audience was other internal Amazon employees who leveraged my reporting and data. On Amazon Marketplace, it was third-party sellers and partner teams. On Alexa, the customer was the most traditional sense. The end user of my product was also the most typical customer. And now on Office 365, it's actually support advocate and agents who provide technical support to Office 365 users. So you can have multiple customers ranging from enterprise to consumer to internal employees. Essentially anyone who is using your product or is actively impacted by your work is your customer. I will be using the term customer to represent all of the examples above and many more as well. All right, starting from the top of the product lifecycle, assess the customer problem. Now we'll dive right into why this is important and how we can leverage data. As a PM, you are closest to your customer. This is a unique vantage point in that you are the voice of your customer. So if you work back from what the ideal customer experience is, you need to ask yourself, are you building new features altogether or improving existing one? If you were to use your product, what are some top reasons or ways you can improve? Think of the ideal experience and work backward from that. Identify measurable goals that are broad and undefined, such as I want my customers to be delighted, or I want to increase feature usage. Once you have identified high-level goals, jot down a few specific and tangible success metrics. Back up your claims with customer anecdotes and data. Sometimes a few strong anecdotes uh, can really serve the problem. One example I can think of is when I was on Amazon Marketplace, the data was showing that we were receiving a high volume of counterfeit products on the Amazon platform based on customer reviews. While there is a high level of customer reviews that may speak as such, after a summit meeting with sellers in person, I realized there's a lot of complexity with the data. There are steps sellers can take to build trust with customers, and that these sellers have quality feedback for us that we miss by just looking at the data. So a balance between customer anecdotes and data is the best way to get a full holistic view of what the customer problem is. Now, before you even start drafting a feature or solution, you want to keep in check with your customer pulse. Frequently read reviews, reach out to your customers directly, send out a poll. Your customer voice will be changing as you roll out features, and it's your responsibility to be on top of it. You want to fully understand your customer before diving into solutions, so you know what degree your feature may or may not impact your customer. And then scale up to a larger, more impactful projects based on your initial pulse check from your audience. You want to assess the progress of your problem and then work backward to create identifiably measurable goals and work backwards from there. As I said earlier, create mock-ups of what the ideal experience is. There's a lot of really cool resources like figma.com. You can create UX mock-ups. I often do that before I roll it out to my UX designer, who then works with me to roll out the features. Document tribal knowledge is, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later on as well, but a lot of times teams, if you're new to a team, they don't have well-documented systems just because it's been evolving. There's not been an active effort to make or document changes on the team. Your team will thank you if you take the initiative to document tribal knowledge and index on tribal knowledge as well. A lot of times the data itself will say one narrative, anecdotes say another, and then the tribal knowledge from the team will also allow you to filter out through the noise and understand the real customer problem. Let's keep going. All right, now that you have figured out the problem, you want to actually gather tangible customer metrics. So get outside perspective. This is the most exciting part for me, at least. I enjoy getting a pulse check, conducting white glove experiences, usability testing and A/B tests, starting off small and then scaling to larger features and larger experiments. The interesting thing about this is we have a concept at Amazon called two-way decisions or two-way door decisions. Is if you conduct an experiment, is the decisions you make reversible? Can you go back to the original UX without severely impacting your customer? Some decisions are one-way door decisions, and that's something that's a risk that you have to take sometimes, a calculated risk to mitigate any other impact. However, optimize on two-way door decisions where you know that you can easily revert back. These are small rollouts, small features that have little to no impact on your end customer. In a survey, I enjoy using Qualtrics. It's the tool I use for surveys, but mix quantitative and free text questions so that you get a balance of open-ended and then very definitive answers to measure impact. Oftentimes with leadership, you want to measure impact, and diving through open-ended free text questions can be cumbersome and might not give you the actual results that you're looking for. So have some simple yes, no, true, false questions so that you can tangibly say what your customer impact and what your customer feedback looks like. As I said earlier, gain tribal knowledge and historical background from peers and partner teams. I have moved around to a couple of different teams, especially right now during the COVID pandemic. I have recently just switched over to Microsoft, and I can't tell you enough the value of talking to partner teams and peers and getting context on a single product from multiple teams really helps you understand not only the customer problem, but also understand as a company, why is this something that needs to be prioritized? Next, you want to be familiar with pulling your own data. Now, if your team has a business analyst or a data scientist on your team, that's great. But a lot of times these teams are backlogged with a lot of work, and oftentimes you are looking to pull metrics right here, right now. So I would suggest getting really comfortable with practicing whatever language you pull your data from and getting familiar with the tables and the pipelines also. Some useful links I've put in. I actually just recently learned about Kaggle, where you can play around with existing data sets that are really, really fascinating. Things like top movies, top books. You can kind of play around with different data sets on Power BI. I've linked it to Power BI, W3 Schools for SQL, whatever language your team uses, just try to get familiar and start practicing. You don't need to start producing metrics, but if you can go in and tweak a query and be able to be self-sufficient with your data, that'll give you a lot more return. So as I said, there's a quantitative and an anecdotal aspect of data, and it's a good idea to keep both of them and keep a balance, because quantitative gives a very different narrative than anecdotal. All right, let's keep going. All right, now this is the smallest slide, but I would say this is probably the meat of this presentation. I have talked to many PMs, both tenured and new, and the biggest pain point is getting their work approved and, more importantly, prioritized. Oftentimes, as a PM, you are competing for engineering resources against other PMs who also have impactful and meaningful work. So, how do you make sure your work isn't being, or how do you make sure that your work isn't being put on the back burner month after month, regardless of how small the feature may be? Prioritize your features into small milestones. By breaking it down into monthly or biweekly blocks, you can show your engineering team that you understand the scope of the effort and you have put consideration into the amount of effort that will go into a feature. Aggregate all of your customer metrics and add impact numbers into your specification doc. This can be in the form of dollars, hours, anything to quantify the amount of effort and work your feature will reduce or save for your company. Remember, your engineers want to be involved with meaningful work too. So know that so if you make your work and show the actual numbers behind it, they also know that their efforts are palpable. Start small. Getting approved for a small feature is a lot easier, and then delivering on your promises builds a positive expectation from your engineering team. Show compassion and empathy towards your engineers and customers, and involve your engineers in decision making. I've worked with a range of engineers. Some prefer being involved in the product, and some prefer having the specifications outlined and not being involved in the process. Adapt your feature depending on which engineer you're working with. I found that is extremely effective, and sort of gauge the interest of the engineer and sort of adapt accordingly. And don't be afraid to not know the how in a feature launch. Product managers are responsible in understanding the what and the why. And that's where you pull your customer metrics, you pull the business impact, you do your due diligence to make sure that the what and why are clear. Engineering is responsible for the how and the when of the problem. So really make sure you double down on the what and why and lean on your dev team for the open-ended questions. It's important to outline unanswered questions in the review with your dev team, and this will give your dev team a sense of ownership. All right, now we're getting into the spec versus a vision doc. These are two different types of ways to present your feature. I've done a collection of both, very, very different, and both have its own purpose and effectiveness. Specification doc is for a very specific feature. It usually has detailed science and engineering plan. It has all the numbers and impact metrics. I load my spec docs with specs with these, usually 1 to 2 pages, and you share them with the relevant stakeholders and team. These are usually much smaller sprint cycles, and it can be taken up and in action within a few months. Now, vision docs, these are exciting. These are larger product, several features in a single doc. There are a lot of open-ended questions regarding prioritization, impact, the how and the when is still not outlined. And it tends to be an aggregate of a lot of several features into one broad vision or scope of the future of a product. It's very forward-looking, and it has a lot of customer metrics that may not be defined. It's usually 6 to 10 pages. It really, really depends. I've seen some go all the way up to 30 pages and some do the job in 5, and usually has an appendix with all of the additional information. This is shared with a broader audience like the org, senior leadership. This is a great time for you to get as much meat and information into your doc to really build trust with your greater org. And then, of course, for leadership or people who are directly impacted by your features, I would send out the doc a few days in advance and give them opportunities to read. But for people who are not as vested into your feature, I tend to create a PowerPoint that summarizes the doc for the rest of the audience. High level features, key launches, things that are critical to know at a high level, but doesn't get into the technical architecture or to any details. All right, let's hop right into implementation. As a new PM, I would recommend to start shipping small features and products that are customer delights. Even if the impact is small, a customer anecdote or data point can really help you build confidence to show you that the customer impact is palpable. Document your findings. Have a public dashboard, heat map, report that shows the weekly and monthly changes on your customer based on the features that you roll out. This will make it clear to your audience why you've made your decisions, and then work backwards from the solution to make sure that you have the data to support your need to be able to build a solution. And be able to relay the data depending on your audience. So if you have a technical audience, you're working with your dev team, your implementation and your impact metrics will look very different than if you're talking to policy or operations. You have to adjust your pitch as a PM depending on who your audience is. And that's, I think, the most dynamic and most exciting part about being a PM. Being able to wear different hats depending on who you're speaking with, but ultimately using the customer as your way to drive forward. Ultimately, keep iterating, keep practicing. As long as these things are not high customer impact, a lot of these can be two-way door decisions, or talk to your manager about how to make more two-way door decisions. Keep iterating upon the changes that you make and scale. Start off with small projects or even a small audience at 10% of your customer base or 20%. And as you get to measure impact, you get to roll that out to a larger audience. And then lastly, use emotional intelligence and empathy to relate to your customer and put yourself through the customer's perspective as you iterate. Are there gaps in the existing process, or are there ways that you could improve that would be beneficial to your customer? All right, now that you've launched, what's the next steps? This, I think, is the most crucial part and also slips away the fastest with the people I've talked about. Oftentimes you're heading towards launch date, and then after launch, there's measurement of impact, but there's no documenting and real publicizing. And that's where I think the real fruit comes from. I would say over-index on documenting, which is extremely beneficial and builds trust. It doesn't take much time, but the return on gas is so much higher. The biggest feedback I've received from young professionals is that they're not getting recognition for the work they do. So much of your work happens behind the scenes, whether that's emails or meetings, that doesn't get visibility. However, sending action items and meeting notes is helpful for both yourself to keep track of your projects, as well as to gain visibility on the traction that you're getting through. Keeps yourself accountable for your work as well. One of my favorite things is sending product launch announcements. This is a good way to sort of give you that sort of satisfaction and visibility. Oftentimes as a PM, I haven't been given accolades for the work that I've done, but rather the processes I've documented or the emails and launch announcements that I've sent out. So it's these low-hanging fruits that are really important to stay on top of, because that will give you the most return on the work that you do. And then even after you've launched your feature, continuously engage with your stakeholders and your customer. Send regular emails in the form of flashes, dashboards, heat maps to stakeholders, so they are also involved with the decisions that you make. Um, Oftentimes we feel separated from our stakeholders and we make decisions that might seem out of a whim. But if we are close to our audience and inform them of the decisions, that also is great to build trust. And then continue to use customer data as your North Star, even as you roll out larger features. Um, Send product launch announcements to a wide audience. You never know who your work may impact. That can also help reduce duplication of work and helps bring visibility as well. Um, let's see, and then continue to assess impact, whether it's dollar or time or effort. The higher the impact, the more likely your work will get prioritized going forward. So the way I see it is it's sort of like a snowball effect, that the larger features you start rolling out, the more trust that you build, and that just accrues over time. All right, now, how do you navigate a new role, and what do you do when data just isn't enough? I started a new job during COVID. I started at Microsoft in August. And let me tell you, it is not easy ramping up remotely. So I can empathize with all of those who have either started new roles, new companies, or are finding themselves in a little bit of a lull in their current role. However, there are ways to mitigate imposter syndrome as a new PM. Know that there are things you don't know, and you should document open ended questions. Feeling imposter syndrome as a PM is very normal. Oftentimes, if you are new to a team, there's existing tribal knowledge and technology that has existed for years before you've come and taken on this role. So navigating a new team can be challenging. Take time to work backward from the customer to understand your team's demands. It'll show your team that you're aligned with their values. And as I spoke earlier, lean on engineers to understand the technical architecture, so that you can be better at ideation and driving new solutions. Oftentimes, even though I don't have a technical background, I like to sit in on and just ask questions to my engineers so that I can understand what is possible within the scope of this product, and gives me better ideas for next time and gets me more familiar with the space. Um, the biggest feedback I've received from non-technical PMs is that they worry that if they don't have an engineering background, they aren't trusted to make good technical judgment. And something interesting that I read was that if you are a non-technical PM working on a technical team, that can actually be advantageous, that you're able to think outside the box because you're not limited by the technical solutions. So I would take your strengths and leverage those and really hone in. For me, I enjoy data, so I use that as my strength. But in the grand scheme of things, if there's one takeaway, it's whatever your strength in as a PM, double down on, because you can leverage your devs to do the engineering aspect. But if there are certain skills that you would like to hone in on, this is an excellent opportunity to showcase that. And then another thing that I've enjoyed doing during these COVID times is to simulate hallway conversations. I put 15 minutes on my coworkers' calendars and just simulate what it would feel like to be in the office. Instead of being able to swing by someone's desk and asking them a quick question, now I have 15 minutes blocked on my calendar. I can just talk to them and pick at their brain up to gain tribal knowledge. That's something I think I am consciously putting in more effort to do during these remote times. And I think there's a lot of value in learning passively, which right now it's a very active effort to learn tribal knowledge and to learn more about the team. Again, document your findings. I've been on teams where I was in the role for 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years, and after a while, I just stopped documenting, and there would be a new person, a PM or dev who would join the team, and they had everything in their OneNote, and I really appreciated that because things are constantly evolving at work, and it's good to know that there is someone who's documenting all of this, so the transition to a new PM or new role when the time comes is a lot smoother. So as a new PM, really index on documenting everything that you're learning. Your team will thank you, and that's a great way to kind of assimilate into the team. And then again, lean on your engineers to understand your infrastructure. Can't say that enough. It might seem like you're asking a lot of simple questions at first, but the rate of that relationship that you're building with engineers is really, really important. And then what I've learned through all of this is in COVID times is to bias towards customer data over tribal knowledge in the grand scheme of things. This is your team's opportunity to leverage fresh eyes and think from an outside perspective to really think creatively. So while tribal knowledge is important to document and to continuously challenge yourself, also bring a fresh lens. Being new to a team can also bring fresh lens and challenge existing mechanisms. Some other things I would say is continue to practice emotional intelligence and empathy. Your guide to relate to your customer, regardless of your team changes regardless of your team changes or org changes. So whatever happens when you don't have tangible customer metrics, kind of lean in on other success signals and customer deterrence. So that's what I have to say about navigating a new role, especially when data isn't enough. There are other alternatives, but if you do have access to customer data, that's something I find is very valuable. Here are some helpful links that I have really used the past couple of years in honing in my product management skills. First is the Harvard Business Review Guide to Better Business Writing. This is an incredible book that goes over how to do something as simple as a meeting in notes, how to send an email update, how to talk to different stakeholders, whether that's technical or non-technical. So I would say all three of these books have been really helpful for me. And I shared earlier the links to kind of play around with data. W3 Schools is great, Kaggle is great. But these are all the things that I've done to kind of keep myself on top of product management skills. Again, I'm very active on LinkedIn Learning. There's a lot of really cool um, things that I've learned through that as well. So overall, that is my pitch on why to keep your customers as your North Star and how to build trust using customer data with your team and your org. And so I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for listening to my talk. And I'd like to thank the product school for letting me speak as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on my LinkedIn. It's my first and my last name. And I'm happy to chat with you and learn more about your product journey. Thanks a lot.